everybody, welcome to Driving Cheap with Jeff. On today's video, this is part 2 of my Dodge Charger 5-speed automatic transmission video. And what I'd like to show you before I return my core back to the salvage yard is what I figured out about the Mercedes-Benz NAG 1 722-6 transmission. I've disassembled this somewhat, and the reason, well, first of all, the reason I replaced this transmission was basically because of this here. This right here. This was my problem. And I bought a cheap one from eBay, and really the only thing to do when you need a conductor plate, and mainly the problem that most commonly goes bad with these conductor plates are these speed sensors here, A and B speed sensors. And I replaced this one with one, it was cheap from eBay. And I should have bought the Mopar original Mercedes-Benz part, which is the 52108308AC. Now that's a $611 part online. And you can get these a lot cheaper, but as I found out, they only last about 6 months, and you'll go back into limp mode with a turbine input speed sensor fault. And when you get the turbine input speed sensor fault, it's your first instinct to replace these, to try to ohm out these. These go in your rear wheels, and these are for your anti-slip control. And they're only about, I basically threw these parts at the car hoping that this was a problem, because they're only about $55. And I figured they're probably worn out anyways, because my car does have 159,000 miles on it. And what I figured out that I actually went and I talked to a friend of mine who does transmissions. He's a transmission expert. That's all he does. And the 95% of the issues with this Mercedes NAG 1 transmission is electrical. And I showed him, I took the clutch pack to show him this transmission. Now this car was used primarily only for traffic. It was always on the highway. I bought this car really cheap, and it was always up on the highway, and he was pulling over speeders all the time. So this was a hardcore traffic car. It was a K9 unit as well. So I'm sure they did the drug interdiction with this car, and they were always trying to catch people up on 95 with it. Always on the interstate, always recognized it. And the clutch, and I mean the discs look great. I mean it was floored constantly. The rubber bushings on the drive shaft were about to break all the way through, and the hanger bearing on the drive shaft was completely shot. And so that just tells you it was floored a lot. This car really got romped on. And when I took it apart, because I just had to see what it looked like inside, everything was just amazingly clean. Now I did, because I did do work on the transmission, so I had changed the fluid and filter on it twice, but it never really looked that bad. And this is the original transmission for the car. And what you'll notice, I was interested in seeing where the pickups were. I was thinking, well, maybe it's not the conductor plate. Maybe it has something to do with these pickups right here, because this conductor plate, when you put it up in here, it mounts, it clicks over the top of this valve body here, and where's this thing going here? Yeah, right here. So this conductor, it attaches like so right here, right? And when you put the valve body back up in here, this is the upside down valve body. So you're looking at this, when you take the pan off, this is what you're looking at, and you just unbolt it. It has a bunch of, you could take this whole transmission apart with nothing more than a T30 Torx socket and a T45 Torx socket. And to remove this little plug that comes in from the outside of the transmission, after you put the valve body and the pan back on, the valve body is not going to come off unless you unscrew this, the 7mm 1/4" socket. You just unscrew this. After you unplug your electrical connection, this pulls through, and some transmission fluid will spill out when you take this out. And you also want to check your wiring harness that plugs into this, because, or I'm sorry, these pins right here. Check these pins, make sure there's nothing wrong with them, and check your wiring harness to make sure it's not burned or frayed or anything. All right, in my first video, I showed how to plug all these in. They just snap in place. They have these little brackets that retain them. Yeah, these bolt through the valve body and they retain them down. The filter, I actually took the filter apart just to check it out. It was a little dirty, but not really. What I was interested in was finding out why. Could the speed sensor possibly not be bad and maybe be something on the transmission? So I looked over here, and how this sets in here is like this, and this rotates. This is how it gets its. This is how it determines how fast, how many revolutions this thing's spinning. There's another sensor right here. I'm not quite sure what this does, but I know my problem was speed sensor B on this. And this is where this spins, so it's making a determination off of that. And everything seemed to be nice and tight, like it wasn't too loose or anything like that. All that stuff is gonna, when you bolt this back on, everything tightens up and stiffens up on there. But definitely do not skimp on the conductor plate, because if you have to replace this on the Dodge Charger with a Hemi, you're going to have to replace the rear, like you're going to have to remove the rear cross member. That's another 6 bolts, and you have to jack up the back of the engine to hold it up while you do it. And it's just a little extra work. If you have an older model that has the 3.5 V6, all you have to do is actually just drop the pan. The cross member is farther back on the V6 version, on the older V6 version. These are the transmissions that they've always stayed with for the police package, because it was the only one, it was the only transmission that was set up to have the column shifter. That's my understanding, to have the column shifter. They're very good transmissions. And my friend, he said he's only ever seen one time where he's done loads. He's made loads of repairs on the electrical, which would be the conductor plate or these solenoids. Like I had this one solenoid went bad at one point. I had to replace that. And when you take this out, and you remove this, you gotta get a grip on it, it's oily. Take this out here, you will see that it has planetary gears inside. He said one time he saw planetary gears get damaged, but who knows, it was probably from abuse. But for the most part, my local police department, I talked to the mechanics, and they've never had one of these go bad. They've never had a transmission go out on any of their cars, and they've been buying the Chargers and Magnums since they first came out. Now, pretty much the torque converters are the same way. They're really reliable. When you take the transmission out, these came like this from the junkyard. When you buy one used from the junkyard, they just cut the lines off and pinch them so the fluid doesn't leak out. Basically the only other tools you need are right over here. You know, through 3/8, long 3/8 ratchet, short 3/8 ratchet, flat screwdriver, pry bar, extension, not faster with an electric impact. It's better to have something slightly stronger. Now, when I change the fluid and filter, pretty much, like no matter what, when you change the fluid and filter, these cars take 5 quarts of this ATF, Dextron Mercuron. This is what I put in here. Let's get it at O'Reilly's. 5 quarts is where it needs to be at. I thought it would be a good idea to change the seals on the transmission, but my friend with the transmission shop, he said, don't even worry about it. This transmission had high miles, and it showed no indications of any leaking. He said, just leave it alone. It'll be fine. So my transmission had 70,000 miles, so I didn't care to replace this one or the one here, the output seal. This is the input seal, it's the output seal. I wasn't worried about it. So I just, I left it. It didn't look like it was leaking. 70,000 miles, it's not going to. These are really tight. It's just, the reason I'm making this video, is
just really, I want you to have confidence in the mechanicals of the transmission. If you have a problem with one of these, 95% of the time it's going to be electrical. It's not going to be mechanical. Unless you clearly abuse it really, really badly. But they're really well-built transmissions. They're simple, and the majority of the problems are electrical. So